Hello, my name is Kamila Banak, and today we are recording a little interview with Angie Weinberger and with Heather Nehring. As you might already know, Angie has written a book, The Global Rockstar Album, 21 Verses to Find Your Tact as an Inclusive Leader. And today, Heather would like to ask her some questions regarding the book. Heather is originally from the United States, but now she's a resident of Germany, and she has worked throughout the Europe for over 2 decades. So she's an expat herself. She has gained international work experience, more than 24 years in both the public and commercial sectors. She holds an accreditation as a manager, trainer, and coach, and she has been facilitating since 2003. And throughout her career, she also has worked with over 30 different nationalities. So please, Heather, now feel free to ask your questions.
Camilla, thank you very much. Angie, thank you for finding time for me. After I read your book, I was really curious about having a chance to explore a couple of ideas in greater depth.
Very good, and it's great to see you here live.
Thank you. So we've known each other for a long time, and you have often been my go-to person when I'm feeling challenged as an expat. And so I just wanted to explore with you the topic of especially establishing psychological safety when you're a new arrival in a country and also being part of an organizational culture. So there are at least two cultures happening at the same time.
So, this is a challenge, I would say, for every expat moving into a
Yeah.
new managing role, usually. And this is also, our target group for the book, expatriate managers, managers of international teams who want to move into becoming a more inclusive leader. And the reason why we think this psychological safety is so important is because one of the things I've noticed in in many coaching sessions is that if you cannot provide this psychological safety to your team members, where they can speak up, say their mind, be candid, then you stifle creativity. But even worse, I think with Generation Z, and Kamila, correct me if I'm wrong, I really think, they want to be included and they want to feel like they're contributing and that their opinion counts. And if you cannot do this as a manager and bring everybody, in your team, bring everybody in, get all of their views, get all of the opinions, and give everybody a sense of being at home, yeah, and feeling safe and feeling relaxed, then people will quit. And, we've been talking about the war for talents for 20 years, but now we're like, I would say we're, in the middle of it. We're all faced with challenges of finding the right resources, finding the talent that we need, especially in countries like Germany and Switzerland. We hardly have enough people to run restaurants right now. And we don't even want to talk about, like high profile jobs. So I think we all need to really get better at onboarding new team members, but also at making them feel like they're included and belong in the long run.
Yeah. And the thought that comes to mind, or the question that comes to mind in hearing you say that is what's in your experience is the relationship between how I feel about myself and how I'm able to include others.
That is going very deep. Now, I mean, you and I, we both know that, it always starts with the relationship that you have to yourself, obviously. So when I talk about inclusion, for me, it is also clear that we're including the parts of us that we might not like so much about ourselves, or, what Jung calls the shadow. However, I know this is not maybe understood in the common terminology of inclusion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if for a lay reader it is so obvious that when you go through the 21 verses, that you're also secretly working on including those parts of yourself that you might have either neglected in the past or, just not felt very good about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear you take that perspective because I know that every time I've moved internationally, I find myself confronted with new aspects of who I am, which is also an age factor, but it's especially prominent when I change countries. Do you find that there are areas that are particularly challenging for expats?
I mean, there are many. There are
Hmm.
many, but you know, the most important, let's say, you know, the most important challenges we face, and I can tell you this from my experience as a business owner, they're usually in our head. And so this is also why in my model of an expat experience, we have included what I call the deep experience. And the deep experience is again, you know, based on the idea that in this learning journey that you're on, when you go abroad, when you are confronted with people from other cultures, you might be confronted with some of those demons, yeah, that you did not try to confront when you were at home, where you felt safe, you know, where you had your network, where you knew how to function. So everything at the end of the day is a path to yourself, a journey, you know, to your inner self, basically. And the reason why I would say that, you know, the people who should read the book are probably in a crisis is because, according, you know, to, again, some of those psychologists that we admire, usually in your midlife, you know, you start to understand, oh, there might be other areas in myself that I have neglected.
Hmm. So if I can come to the metaphor of the book, I kind of hear you inviting me to write my own song.
Definitely, definitely. I think everybody should
Mm.
write their own song, and then also go and sing it on stage. I mean, you know, a lot of it is about finding your voice. And if we come back to the inclusion topic, and also, you
Mhm.
know, our party, we're going to have a few unicorns there, because I think, you know, once you look at identity not so much from the outside, from, you know, what I see in you, but more from the inside, then I think you can also find your very unique unicorn voice and, you know, sing songs like It's a Kind of Magic on stage.
Well, and let's just explore the topic of magic for just a second, because you've written a book that's about music, but I know you long enough and well enough to be curious about the magic in the book. What would you most like to inspire in the people who work with you or who read the book?
The first word that comes to mind is hope. And I think, you know, I mean, the reason why I wrote this book is because of all the despair that I see around me and all of the suffering. And that is true for expats, but also for everybody else. For, you know, the polarization we have seen in the last decades, geopolitical tension, the pandemic, all of these crises, you
Yeah.
know, that we move from one place to the next, and we're in a constant anxiety rat race, um, and and so I think the major feeling I want to install is that there is a hope of a better world,
Mhm.
and that every one of us is a leader, and every one of us can contribute to changing this world and making the world a better place in their circle of influence and in their own very unique way, with their own magic sword or wand or superpower.
Mhm. Yeah, that leads me to reflect on a few of my arrival experiences where I kind of thought, well, this is it. I'm reaching a destiny, only to discover that it was the beginning of a new hard path. And and this distraction of discovering actually I'm lost with a nice job. How do you help people reorient? And yeah, and I guess also it's difficult to be inclusive when I'm disoriented myself.
Yeah, totally. And I also think, there's a certain amount of suffering that needs to happen before people are willing to change. So
Yeah.
we hardly want to change when we're in the middle of our comfort zone. So I think if you notice that there is that, or if you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you're in the rat race, if you feel like, you always encounter the same issues again and again and again. For example, you move jobs, but in the next job, you still hate your boss, or, you never get along with your team members, or it's, constantly the same issues happen to you. Then you might start to reflect yourself, and then you might start to say, okay, I might have to go on this inner journey. Another trigger for many people is if they either have a health issue, yeah, they lose a loved one, or if something doesn't go according to plan. Like, for example, if you're like 40, in your 40s or late 30s as a woman, and you suddenly find out you can't have children and you always saw yourself as a mom, that could also, be a trigger. Hardly anyone that I have met has started this journey without some suffering involved.
Yeah, it's interesting that I don't know, is it possible to inspire starting down the path before the suffering gets really bad? How can we do that?
As coaches, we would hope that, right? And also, like when you look inside the corporate world right now, honestly, I think every one of my coaching conversations now starts with, and also that's how our book starts, basically with, checking, where they are in the stress zone. Are they close to burnout, or is there still hope that, they can avoid the burnout? So we hope as coaches that, we can help influence and make sure people get more resilient, people have a better, let's say, long-term strategy, are more sustainable with their own resources. However, I feel that at the moment, from an organizational perspective, there are a few mismatches, and we cannot solve everything with coaching. We also need, other organizational structures. We need flatter hierarchies. We need to get rid of some of the old Taylorism thinking in organizations. So there is a lot more to do than just calling the organization agile, which, is the approach that some companies take. So I know that we're in the middle of this transformation, and I feel that, sometimes companies are trying to solve some of those problems just by saying, okay, now we're going to run a very good coaching program for everybody, and that's just going to solve all your problems. This is a bit too short-sighted, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your insights. I'm glad we could spend time together.
Me too.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Kamila.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So that was a very insightful conversation. Thank you both for that. And we invite you for our book launch, which will be happening in Zurich on Tuesday, 26th. You can find more details on our LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.